In the fast-paced, brand-loyal sport of NASCAR, few teams have won more races or worked with more marquee brands than Joe Gibbs Racing. Since its founding in 1992 by Pro Football and NASCAR Hall of Famer Joe Gibbs, team president Dave Alpern has worked alongside its famed owner, playing a key role in the organization's growth and success over its 30-plus year history. Starting as an unpaid intern, Alpern has held nearly every position in the front office, helping to lead a startup team from 15 employees to over 500 and into NASCAR's winningest organizations across the sport's top 2 national series. Alpern has worked with top executives from some of America's biggest and best brands and has helped guide elite race car drivers into polished corporate spokesmen. He's a frequent university guest lecturer and a highly sought-after corporate keynote speaker. He's also appeared on countless podcasts and media outlets. Dave married his college sweetheart, Stacy, and they have 3 adult boys who were born and raised in their hometown of Charlotte. Dave considers it his greatest joy to be a dad. Alpern shares the stories and principles he's learned over his 3-decade career in his published book, Taking the Lead: Winning Principles That Fuel Joe Gibbs Racing. The book has been endorsed by C-level executives, Hall of Fame drivers, and leaders in both ministry and entertainment. Please welcome Dave Alpern.
Thank you. Considering usually coaches speaking, and most of my career I was holding his briefcase in the back of the room, it's pretty wild that I have an intro video. So that was actually, can we watch that again? I'm just kidding. I don't get to do this very often. Thank you, Bill, and everyone at CBMC. Again, it's a joy for me to be here. Jason, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And Greg, definitely thanks for hosting. Speaking of a guy that walks the walk right here, Greg Walter, and for mentioning me and Ric Flair in the same sentence. That's never happened. I'm actually pretty excited about that. Definitely, it's a home game for me here. Sunday, we had race cars racing right out back. Unfortunately, we did finish second, which is first loser, which means we did not get a trophy. We've won a few times. I will say a cool tradition here at Charlotte Speedway, and you saw one of the scenes from Victory Lane from the Coke 600. When you win here, Greg and Marcus and his staff have a buffet right 1 floor up from us. That's awesome. So I've eaten omelets. My kids, that's their favorite part of Charlotte is, Dad, if we win, do we get to go have the buffet? So we go up and we have the buffet upstairs and we pillage the it's not really intended for us, but we come anyway, and Greg's very gracious. So with all that, I am curious, by a show of hands, how many people have actually been to a NASCAR race in the room? How many we got? Man, this is a home crowd. That is awesome. Thank you. For those of you who have not, for those of you who didn't put your hands up, have you seen Talladega Nights? Okay, good. All right, there we go. All right. I think that's everybody. It's nothing like that, by the way. For those of you who aren't NASCAR fans, the way it works every week, 36 drivers turn left in a circle for about 3.5 hours, or sometimes in a roval. And at the end, one of them wins. Something unique about Joe Gibbs Racing, my organization, is that of those 36 cars, 4 of them belong to Joe Gibbs Racing. So we're actually a pro sports team that's competing against itself in addition to the other teams. I have 3 boys. Anybody with multiple kids knows what it's like when they compete at something. It's usually chaos. You default to whoever does the worst. So we are a pro sports team that actually goes to every event knowing, best case scenario, 3 teams are going to lose. It's pretty tough. And so you can imagine the complexity of that. Before I go on, I will ask another trivia question. I'm going to call on whoever's hand I see first. I mentioned that we have 4 cars that compete every week. Is there anyone who can name, that doesn't work for Joe Gibbs Racing or the Speedway, that can name the 4 drivers that drive for Joe Gibbs Racing? Do I have a hand? All right, here's one right here. All right.
Ty Gibbs.
That's one.
Denny Hamlin.
Martin Truex. All right. What's your name?
Zach.
Good job, Zach. All right, here we go. There's our crew. All right. Again, Denny Hamlin, FedEx, Martin Truex, Bass Pro Shops. We got Christopher Bell, Stanley Black & Decker, and Ty Gibbs, who, if you didn't know before and don't recognize the name, yes, that is Joe Gibbs' grandson, who is actually the youngest driver in the Cup Series, 21 years old, who has the perfect sponsor for a 21-year-old Monster Energy. I talk a lot at universities about why brands sponsor NASCAR, and we're not going to get into a lecture about that. But to give you an idea, most professional sports organizations, the 4 big stick and ball sports, 10 to 15% of their revenue comes from sponsorship. In NASCAR, for many of the teams, it's around 60%. So that gives you an idea that as a race team executive, an inordinate amount of our time goes towards keeping those folks happy. The gentleman in the middle is the aforementioned Joe Gibbs. That is my boss. Really cool stat about Joe Gibbs. He's the only human that's in both the NASCAR and Pro Football Hall of Fame. So pretty cool. 3 Super Bowl championships as an NFL coach of my beloved Washington team, and 5 NASCAR Cup Series championships, hopefully to be added to as we're 4 races from the championship race and still have Christopher and Denny alive to win the championship. I mentioned the competing against ourselves. This is just one graphic. I know there's a lot to look at, but it's on purpose. It just gives you an idea of the complexity of a NASCAR team. So we race 4 cars in Cup, as I mentioned. We have a AAA series, Xfinity, that is like our AAA minor league team that races on Saturdays. We have 4 teams in that series. So we're racing 9 cars in 2 series. We have 8 crew chiefs. The crew chief is the head coach, all super smart engineers. We have pit crews. So you see the pit crews. This may surprise you. We have over 50 pit crew athletes. Every single one of them is a former D1 athlete. A dozen or so of them actually played professional sports. So again, imagine an environment where they're all competing for a starting job on Sunday, but when they get that job, they're going to the race competing right next to a teammate that is on another team for that race. So you can imagine what the plane rides home can be like sometimes. Again, we know, best case, 75% of that airplane lost the race. Maybe one wins, and they're sitting next to each other. So the dynamic as a leader at a NASCAR team is very unique because we're trying to keep everyone focused on the fact that 4 cars, 1 team. We're all part of one team, but there are a lot of battles. Again, the way that we're set up, I asked about Talladega Nights. There's another movie, Days of Thunder, great movie, but they build a car in a barn, and they win the Daytona 500. Doesn't really work like that. 20 minutes from here, we've got, with our Xfinity and our Cup, we have 350,000 square feet. We have over 50 engineers. Okay, we got a guy with a PhD from Stanford in aeronautical engineering. I feel like a moron even walking by his office. I don't even have to talk to him, and I feel stupid. We got some smart guys. We have our own, I mentioned aviation. We have 3 airplanes. We have our own flight attendants, mechanics, pilots. We're a much more complex organization than most people would expect. And again, it never stops. It's nonstop. In fact, Coach says hi. In the car getting out, I got a call. 20 minutes with him on the phone with a crisis, and of course and I will say to his credit, I reminded him what I was doing. He goes, "Let me pray for you." So he prayed with me, and then he said, "Are you coming back afterwards?" So I've got that going for me, which is nice. Later today, but it wasn't always this complicated. So I moved down to Charlotte in the early 90s. I went to school in Northern Virginia at George Mason University, and I moved down to Charlotte, North Carolina on a hunch. I had the opportunity to be an unpaid intern with a startup NASCAR team. I had a connection to the family through Joe Gibbs' oldest son, JD, and I had a hunch about Coach Gibbs that everything he touches turns to gold. Those of you who know Coach, anyone being from Washington, it's a city divided. No one agrees on anything except when the football team was good. That brought that town together. And Joe Gibbs was the architect of bringing that town together. He decided, hey, I'm going to move on and I'm going to start a NASCAR team. So I had the chance to be an intern. We had a little race shop on Harris Boulevard when Harris Boulevard was 2-lane road, 10,000 square feet. It really was a garage. And I came down with no job description. I was dating it was my wife, my girlfriend at the time, and you can imagine her reaction and my parents' reaction when I said, hey, I'm going to move to Charlotte, work in a garage. I'm not going to get paid probably for 6 months. I was motivated because I had to deal with my wife's, again, then girlfriend's father. I say it was a deal. It was his deal. There was an understanding that I needed a job before I could ask her to marry. So I was very motivated to not only come down here and hopefully eventually get paid for this said internship. So I came to Charlotte. They didn't have anywhere to put the college puke. I had a lot of nicknames of the guys in the back. That was one of the ones that I can actually share with you. Carpet walker, there were a lot of them. And so they actually emptied out a broom closet for me. And so my first office was in a broom closet. So keep in mind, again, not getting paid. I have one of those elementary school desks where the little wooden desks where the top's attached to the bottom because there wasn't room for anything else in a broom closet. So no electrical outlets in a broom closet, of course. So I had an orange extension cord that went out into the hallway. Again, early 90s, so many of you, there was no laptops, there was no screens, there was no internet. I had a spiral notebook and a pen. The extension cord, you might ask, what was that plugged in? It was plugged into a lamp. So I had a lamp, a desk, a notebook, and it's funny, I did have a phone. It wasn't rotary, but it was a push-button phone. And of course, that had to go all the way to the receptionist desk, and so it was duct taped. It was duct taped to the floor. And so again, not the most glamorous start. And that's how I got my start. And through a crazy set of circumstances, ended up becoming the president of Joe Gibbs Racing. When you start work at Joe Gibbs Racing, you get a talk from Coach, and everybody knows what it goes something like this. Welcome to Joe Gibbs Racing. There's a name on your shirt, and it isn't yours. Respect the name on the shirt and don't embarrass me. Okay, good talk. Pretty intimidating. As an employee of Joe Gibbs Racing, when I wear my Joe Gibbs Racing logo, I am representing a two-sport Hall of Famer that spent his entire year building his reputation, and everything I do represents the name on the shirt. When I go to a restaurant, the way that I treat the server does what? Represents the name on the shirt. When I return my rental car, when I go to a grocery store, when I treat someone from another business a certain way, it represents what? The name on the shirt. Years ago, we had a couple of engineers who bended the rules. Let's just say there's a saying in some of those movies, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. As executives, we're like, just make the cars go fast. Don't do anything illegal. But this is long story short. We had a couple of guys who created a device that was illegal, and they got caught, and we got a big penalty from NASCAR. And I remember Coach and I were out. We had flown somewhere. We were having dinner with some executives from a sponsor, and we get the call, hey, NASCAR's coming down. We're about to get a huge penalty. And we're like, good gosh, does this really have to happen right now? And this is a true story. An hour later, we're sitting at a restaurant that has TVs. On the ticker on SportsCenter, it says Joe Gibbs Racing busted for cheating, while we're having to explain this to the executives. The next day, my dear wife at the grocery store gets tapped on the shoulder by a lady from our church. This is a prior church that I used to go to. How's it feel to know your husband works for a cheater? Oof. I share that to say the actions of those two guys, what? It affected on me, my wife, and the name on the shirt. Because everything we do reflects on the name on the shirt. I showed you the picture of the drivers. Those drivers represent the names on their shirt. FedEx, Bass Pro, everything they do, they are literally brand ambassadors for the brands that sponsor us. Everything the driver does, says, reflects what? The name on the shirt. And let me say this, with social media, drivers will tweet something every now and then that sponsors don't like. We get the call. We used to have a driver for 15 years. Anybody remember Kyle Busch? Love me some Kyle Busch. Won 2 championships. Will go down maybe as the greatest, one of the greatest of all time. Kyle's sponsor, you guys remember? Who is the sponsor? M&M's. M&M's target market is middle-aged moms. They don't like controversy. That's who they're trying to sell to. So Kyle, every now and then he'd do something controversial. Kyle might tell his in-car camera that they're number one because our drivers are live mic'd during the events. Kyle might say some things. There was one race in particular, he got upset, decided, I'm going to wreck a guy, which you can do under a race, but you can't do it under caution. And under caution, he wrecked a guy, took a guy out. Well, guess what? Mars's switchboard lit up. I'm never buying M&M's again. How could you sponsor that guy? Coach and I had to wake up the next morning and fly to their headquarters and beg them not to drop our multi-million-dollar sponsor because of what? The actions of a person who didn't represent well the name on the shirt. We're here today. You talk about faith. Talk about how is that incorporated into our business. And I want to share with you that I believe that as Christians, for those of us that have a relationship with Christ, everything we do represents represents a name on the shirt, and there's a name on our shirt, and it isn't ours. It's the name above all names. It's Jesus Christ. Everything we do reflects the name on the shirt. 2 Corinthians, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. Our sponsors make their appeal through the drivers. That's why they endorse us. Folks, as believers, think about this concept. The God of the universe is making his appeal through you, through me. And that doesn't just mean when we go to church. That doesn't give us the option of just saying, hey, I'm kind of in. We're either all in or we're not. That means business. That means when we go to work. So let's talk about some tangible, what does that look like as a person that's representing the name above all names on their shirt? I've got just kind of a few things here. Number one, people say, hey, what's the most important thing for a Christian business? And I think my answer probably surprises them. You know what my number one thing is? Be great. Be really good at what you do. By the way, if I was the 10th best race team, you ain't asking me, Bill's not going to ask me to go, who cares what I think? That guy stinks. Why would those guys be here? I have a saying, no one cares what you think if you stink. So if you want to have influence, start with be great. Be really good at what you do. If you want to have a platform, you want people to care and want to be like you, be great at what you do. If you're getting in late, leaving early, gossiping behind people's back, no one's going to care what the heck you think about anything. That's no way to represent the name above all names. So be great at what you do, first of all. Be great. Secondly, there's two types of people, and it's a choice we make every day, I believe. There's fountains and there's drains. You guys know what it's like to be around a drain, somebody who kind of sucks the life out of every interaction, gossip, talk behind people's back. I got people that walk into my office, and again, the drains, they'll drop the bomb on you and they'll leave. They have no interest in helping or solving a problem. They just want to tell you how bad someone else is. Drains. Shame on me as a representative of the name above all names if I am a drain to anyone, because God is not a drain. Then there's fountains. A fountain is someone who breathes life into every interaction. And by the way, you can work in an emergency room in a stressful environment and still be a fountain. It doesn't mean that you're always bringing good news. It's that you're going about it where you're looking for solutions. You're being encouraging. You're a great team player that wants everyone around you to be better. If I went out to the hallway and said I want to get a drink from the water fountain, if I pulled the water fountain from the wall, what am I going to find it's plugged into? It's plugged into a water source. If I unplug the water source, it no longer becomes a fountain anymore. As believers, we have to be connected to the source or we are not capable of being a fountain. Jason mentioned reading his Bible earlier today. If we are not spending time in prayer and we're not letting God speak to us through his word, it's going to be very difficult to be a fountain. So stay connected to the source, be a fountain, not a drain. Treat people like a soul and not a transaction. This is something that I saw lived out. My best buddy, J.D. Gibbs, Coach's oldest son, really demonstrated this. Everybody knows what it's like to be treated like a transaction. I can tell you, working for Coach Gibbs my whole career, I experienced it almost every day of my career. And what that looks like, I remember early in my career, people would come talk to me, and they would act like they were actually excited about me, and I'd start going, hey, this is great. Maybe they're going to ask me to come do this. And invariably, it ended with, so can you get Coach Gibbs to do this for me? And I would go, that's what I thought. That's what it means to be treated like a transaction. Someone looking over your shoulder at who's the more important person. Every person that we interact with in business, customers, people that work under us, alongside us, that we work for, fearfully, wonderfully made souls. Treat everyone like a soul and not a transaction. If you're representing the name above all names, that should be a motivation for each of us. How about our priorities? Like if I saw your Google Calendar, what would it say about whose name is on your shirt? Hey, are you spending time in the Word? Husbands, are you spending time with your wife? Parents, are you prioritizing your kids? And let me say this, it's hard. There's different stages of life. If you're in medical school or I get it. You're going to have smaller amounts of margins. The only thing I will encourage you is to be fiercely, fiercely intentional with your schedule. Fiercely intentional. Margin and balance does not happen on accident, period. It just doesn't. So be intentional with your priorities because they are demonstrating what's important to you by the way that you're living your life. Again, social media. What would your social media say about the name above all names? Would it say that the God of the universe is red or blue? Or would it say, what would it say about you? Would it say that, man, the God of the universe must be a drain because everything you post stresses me out? So again, think about that. When I tweet something for Joe Gibbs Racing, I am so paranoid about hashtagging everything right and making sure I don't screw something up. How often are we that sensitive about our faith and say, hey, when I post this, it's reflecting the God of the universe. I hope what I'm posting represents him well. All right, we're going to unpack this here. Real quick, we're going to unpack. This is the first verse I ever memorized as a Christian. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. I'm going to unpack a couple things here just to be an encouragement. First of all, great cloud of witness. We're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. In this room, what it's referring to is other believers who are doing this with you. There's a reason the Bible didn't send people out one by one. We are not meant to do this in isolation. We have got to have others. And I hope today is an encouragement. I had the joy of coming to know the Lord in high school through a ministry called Young Life. And there's a group of brothers. I've got a text chain called the Band of Brothers. There's 11 of us 35 years later that text every day. And we're in it together. That's my Band of Brothers. Because we had an ambassador. We had two guys that had the guts to come in our high school. God made his appeal through us in our high school. Mike Phelan's here. He's one of my Band of Brothers, lives here in Charlotte with me. Brother Mike surprised me today. What hinders us, what entangles us in racing? We have cheating. We have all kinds of things that can happen, penalties, speeding. What's hindering in your life? Take an inventory of it. We have an exercise at the end of every season. We take all the car parts out. We lay them out on the floor because the car has to weigh a certain amount. But you want to put the weight where you want it. So we lay every part and piece out at the end of the season. And we take an inventory. How do we make this 2 ounces lighter? How do we make this better? We take a whole inventory of how do we make the car, what's hindering the car from being as fast as it can be? When's the last time we did that in our lives? Lay everything out, take a look at it. Get rid of that. That's a waste. That's really good. I need more of that. I encourage you, again, as believers, lay off everything that's hindering you because this is hard enough. There's things that we can do that. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. So this is the idea. This is probably the most important part of this verse for me. I get seasick, and so anyone knows when you're on a boat and you get seasick, what do you look at? The horizon, something that's not moving. Culture is moving. God's word never changes. God doesn't change. Culture, every day, is what? Getting further. Fix your eyes on the one thing that's not moving. The name above all names. If we're going to follow the name above all names, we should be fix our eyes on the one thing that's not moving, staying connected to the source. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult. I want to share with you in the time that I have left. I think God is preparing each of you for something. You saw in the video, I wrote a book. I really believe, and my kids have heard me say this 1,000 times, that I really believe our lives are like a book. And if I'm honest with you, there are pages, sometimes entire chapters, that just plain stink. They're not the way I would have written them, to be totally honest with you. I'm a planner. If you could just let me peek to the end and say, oh, I get it, it would make each chapter much easier, right? We can't do that. Unfortunately, we can't do that. And I'm a testimony. I'm going to share a few things here. I am a testimony. Almost every chapter of my life started completely the opposite of the way that I would have planned it. But again, God was preparing me for the next thing. I went to high school. Mike knows this. I showed up at a high school of 3,000 people, 80 pounds, 5 feet tall, smallest kid in a high school of over 3,000 people. First week of school, this is no joke. You see this in movies and you go, this never happens. Oh, it happens. I got stuffed in a trash can. True story. Mike did not take me out. He didn't put me in it, but he didn't pull me out. Still a little bitter about that. I was like, God, is this some cruel joke? Really? Is this? I also have a neurological disorder called Tourette syndrome. My symptoms are much better now, but they were at their worst in high school. So being 5 feet tall, 80 pounds, having Tourette's is not the greatest recipe for making friends and meeting girls. So let's just say rough start. And I had never been to church in my life, ever. And so, but I knew God was there, and I had many dark nights of the soul. I call them, again, I didn't call them this then because the movie didn't exist. I call them Lieutenant Dan moments, where you're at the top of the mast just having it out with God going, really? Seriously? Is this my lot? I don't know. I think Lieutenant Dan moments are healthy. I had a lot of those as a kid. And so going to high school, but again, God, why would you write my chapter like this? Really, is this how high school is going to go? Well, little did I know, had I flipped to the end of the chapter, later in life, I'd meet my band of brothers. I'd walk into Joe Gibbs's basement hosting a Young Life meeting with his son, J.D. Gibbs, who I knew there was something different about J.D., but I didn't know what it was until they started talking about Christ and what we're talking about today. And I went, that's it. That's what's different. He's representing the name above all names. That's why the quarterback of the football team sits at different people's tables and says, hi, I'm JD. And they go, I know who you are, because he knew the power of influence as a high school kid. And to be honest with you, and I'm going to speak, if there's those here today that maybe don't call yourself, maybe you're not a Christian and you wouldn't be considered a follower of Christ, I was you. I'm with you. I would encourage you with this. I spent 2 years going to these meetings going, you guys are nuts. This is crazy. You guys are getting brainwashed. We're talking about resurrection. But I came to the conclusion my senior year, this is either true or it isn't. This isn't a fairy tale. God either sent Jesus Christ to walk earth. What it says in the Bible is true. He died and was resurrected, or he didn't. And I believe, and I would share this with everyone, I believe how you respond to that is the most important decision you'll ever make in your entire life. So at least look at it, investigate it, because you owe it to yourself. And to me, I made the decision my senior year to give all I knew of myself to all I knew of Jesus. Both wasn't a lot. And that's how my journey started. I didn't have to have everything figured out. But I share that to tell you, high school started off one way, God was preparing me. Go to college. I get into my fourth choice of college. Everyone goes off. Mike went to UVA. I had friends that went to different schools. I went to the commuter school in my hometown, and that's not where I wanted to go. And so I ended up living in an apartment with guys that weren't even in college my freshman year. I was an electrical engineering major. I'm horrible at math and science. Dumb decision. My dad was an electrical engineer, and my whole life was about trying to please my dad. I was his only son. My dad, I'll talk a little bit about him here in a minute. Freshman year of college, to that point, worst year of my life, period. God, what are you doing? I'm a new believer? Really? You didn't hook me up? All my friends went off I feel like a failure. God knew. God prepared me because God allowed me to be in my hometown so I could be mentored by those two Young Life leaders that were the ambassadors that introduced me to Jesus. I got to become a Young Life leader there. God knew I would meet my soulmate at that school, my wife, Stacy. God knew two of my best buddies, Moose and Gumby, would transfer from their schools to this school, and we would all live together our last two of college and do ministry together. College, the greatest experience of my life. Again, first couple chapters, I didn't realize God knew what he was doing. God was preparing me. Again, we go to my career, and I already shared with you, I started in a broom closet. Really? I can remember being in this broom closet thinking to myself, and so my father, I didn't share about my father. My father, I didn't know till I was a senior in high school when he retired and started a consulting firm. My father had been a CIA operative. Me and my sisters were born in foreign countries. My parents divorced when I was 8. He was gone all the time. Found out he'd been to the White House. He'd briefed presidents. He spoke 4 languages. And I'm like, where have I been? But I wanted, like most boys, to please my dad. My dad was brilliant. He was an electrical engineer. And I just remember sitting in this broom closet, literally as an unpaid intern in a garage going, I am an utter failure to my dad. I mean, it haunted me all the time. And again, as God does, God was preparing me. Fast forward 20 years into my career, I keep a prayer journal, which, full disclosure, is really a complaint journal. You're allowed to be a drain to God. Let me just say that. So I was a drain to God. And often it was me talking about, they don't appreciate me. For 10 years, I did T-shirts, and I was the souvenir guy. And Coach would call me the T-shirt guy, which he meant as an endearment, but I was like, I was made for more than just being the T-shirt guy. And as we tend to do, we're always looking at the next thing instead of just being great at the thing that we're in right now. And I would write in this journal, God, I could do that, or I could do that. 20 years of my career. I mean, I stayed there, felt like I was faithful. 2014, Phelan and I's best buddy, JD, got sick. And it ended up being terminal. JD passed away in 2019. But shortly after his illness began, the family came to me and said, Dave, someone's got to take JD's job. we're naming you president. And I took my best friend's job to be the president of his family's business, and I'm not the member of the family. But a light bulb went off. God had been preparing me for 20 years. All those things I complained about, he knew, you got to do that because I got something for you. Just shut up and obey me. I didn't trust him. I didn't know. Again, if we could flip forward, things would make more sense. But again, the God of the universe has already written it, and we got to trust him. I want to end with a couple encouragements. I mentioned my father. My dad later in life. I had all but given up praying for my dad, 20 years. And part of my faith journey was me being afraid what my dad would say. My dad's Jewish. We didn't celebrate. We celebrated Christmas, but for no religious reasons. So I was so worried of what my dad would say if I told him I'd come to faith. When I became a Christian, he was okay with it, but I was really timid with my dad, and I kind of stopped praying for him because I was like, my dad's got everything figured out. I don't need to tell my dad. Well, late in life, my dad got cancer, and my father-in-law led my dad to the Lord, and my dad got baptized with all three of my sons. And I share that not just to be an encouragement, but for this reason. Those ambassadors who made God's appeal to me, that had the guts to model that to me, they didn't just change me. 3 generations of my family, my kids, my dad. And when we represent the name above all the names, we are not just affecting the people that we interact with. Generations. The Bible's full of it. Generations of people based on how we're living our lives. I want to just finish by just saying this. Maybe you're struggling in the chapter you're in or the page you're in. I get it. But God wrote it. So cast your cares on the God of the universe. Stay connected to the source. I hope that's an encouragement to each one of you, and understand this. It is hard. There is a reason that the Bible says narrow is the path and few follow it. It is hard. It is hard. Again, culture, moving. Sometimes, and so I hope this is an encouragement. I hope each of you, if you don't have a home church, if you don't have someone in your life that is speaking life into you and encouraging your faith, that you'd get that you'd grab somebody here. Super, super important to have this if we're going to run the race that God's marked out for us. So I'm super grateful for the time. I don't get to do this very often. I'm really grateful to get to share my story, and I hope it's an encouragement to each one of you. So with that, Bill, thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate that.